a layoff is pretty powerful. Many people will experience a range of emotional reactions after a layoff. So, for example, shock, anger, grief, fear are all natural responses when you have experienced a layoff. And I think it's really important to make sure that when that happens, you're giving yourself permission to process those emotions because the emotional impact is real and it's valid. And if you try to um, be overly positive, then you can really hamper your progress in being able to effectively manage the situation for yourself. So really giving yourself permission to feel whatever it is you're feeling around this time is super important. At the same time, it's also really worthwhile to remind yourself that layoffs are professional events, even though it feels very personal. The decisions about who to lay off and who stays in a company are organizational decisions. They're very rarely made based on your personal value to the company. So even though after a layoff, many people will feel that it is a reflection on them personally because it is such a personal, has a personal impact. It's really important to continually remind yourself that this was a strategic organizational decision that was made with for other reasons than the impact it would have on you personally. So I invite you now to think about one word that describes how this experience has felt for you as you're going through this transition right now. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and pop that word into the chat. Just want to again give folks an opportunity to acknowledge whatever emotions might be present for you. So again, if you feel comfortable, take a moment, think about how you are responding, and if it feels okay to you, you can go ahead and pop that in the chat. So I'll give folks a moment to decide whether it makes sense. Also acknowledging that depending on where you are in this journey process, it can feel very scary to acknowledge those emotions. So you're perfectly welcome to just keep that response to yourself as well. After you have given yourself the opportunity to res feel whatever emotions you are feeling, it's helpful to remind yourself that this is a difficult situation that you find yourself in. And even if you're not happy about it, feel that it is unfair, wish that this didn't happen, all very natural reactions that people have, it can also be super helpful to acknowledge and accept the reality of the situation that you find yourself in right now. So, radical acceptance is actually a pretty powerful and empowering process that can sort of help you fuel your way through this difficult experience. Acceptance is a tricky concept for a lot of us humans because when something bad happens to us, something that we wish didn't happen, we feel like it might be unfair. And accepting the reality of the situation sometimes feels like we're giving our consent or approval that this is okay, or trying to convince ourselves that it doesn't really matter. And in point of fact, when we move into acceptance, we're really acknowledging and facing the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. And this is helpful because it conserves our emotional energy. When we're in a state of resistance and denial and not wanting to accept the situation that we find ourselves in, that really drains our energy. And so while it is very hard to enter that state of acceptance, like this is the reality of the situation I'm in, I do not need to like it. I do not need to think it's okay in order for me to accept it so that I can be empowered to take the actions that are needed to move forward. So radical acceptance is a important part of the process. I started this presentation by stating that it really is important to acknowledge the feelings that you're having. It's not helpful to bypass that stage of those emotions because they'll continue to pop up if we try to push them down or pretend that they're not there. So it's really important to acknowledge whatever experience, emotional reactions we're having, to give ourselves some opportunity to feel those feelings, but not to stay stuck there. So while the emotions are not going to go away, you might have good days and bad days. They'll sort of fluctuate and go up and down. um, you don't want to get carried away by your emotional reactions. So, a few strategies that can be helpful is to set some time boundaries for the processing of your emotions. So, you want to create some space for those emotional reactions. Some people find it helpful to journal. So to give themselves time for kind of a brain dump at the beginning or the end of a day, to just write down all of your emotions, fears, hopes, or worries. And sometimes getting it physically out of us on a piece of paper helps to allow our minds to settle a bit so that we're able to move on to other things. Some people find it helpful to designate a specific period of time for worrying. So if you tend to be a worrier, set a time limit for the amount of time each day that you can worry and go at it. Set 10 minutes, 20 minutes to be your worry window and worry to your heart's content. And then once that time is up, you can move on to do other activities. And most people find that if they actually designate a very specific time window for worrying, that it's hard to worry constantly during that time. Worry is insidious because it creeps up throughout our day. But if we try to cordon it off to this one time period, the impact that it has on us can be lessened. Having conversations with folks to process your emotions is important, and not letting them go on forever. So you again want to allow yourself the time to share your frustrations, but you want to also be having conversations and connections with folks about other topics as well. And for some people, physical movement is super effective for dealing with the emotions. So the body carries a lot of wisdom, and it also carries a lot of our stress. And so finding ways through movement to allow that emotional energy and stress to move through your system can be helpful, whether it's walking or running, weightlifting, engaging, playing tennis or pickleball or whatever kind of activity that you find helpful. Moving the body can be a way to to keep your momentum going. It's also super, oops, sorry, super helpful to remind yourself regularly that you're bigger than your job title. So for many of us, our jobs are such a important part of our lives. You all went to school for many years and put a lot of effort into building your credentials and becoming experts in your fields. And it can sometimes feel that our entire self-worth can be wrapped up in our employment status. And so during this transition, when you might not be working, it's super helpful to continually be reminding yourself that your role at the particular company or institution that you were working in, your employment status is just one container, one piece of your life. It's not your entire identity. Your skills and your values actually travel with you. And so those are things that you want to continue to keep front and center as you are beginning and working through your job search. So I invite you to take a moment or two to think about three qualities that you bring to any environment. Oftentimes, we think about jobs in terms of job descriptions or job roles that we have, and it can be super helpful to take a broader view, expand out our lens, and think about the values, the skills, the qualities that you bring to a work environment, because those can be really helpful for you to remind yourself of regularly. So you might be the kind of person who is really great at project management, where you really effectively can move with a team through all of the projects of getting started and brainstorming and implementation and wrapping up a project. Perhaps you are somebody who is really great at leading a team or being a team member and supporting your other team members as you're working together. So again, take a few minutes and think about these kinds of qualities that you have that you can bring to any work environment. And apparently the chat isn't working, so we'll go ahead and just give you a couple of minutes to reflect on that and then move on. So once we remind ourselves that our identity is multifaceted, it's complex, there's lots of things that make us who we are, it can be super helpful to reframe the situation that you're finding yourself in. Again, this reframing, this idea of acceptance is not to say that you like what you're experiencing, but trying to make the most of the situation that you find yourself in. I really love this quote by Maya Angelou. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. So you can't change the situation that you were laid off, but you have control and agency over how you're going to manage your way through this situation. So moving from a mindset of having a perspective of why did this happen to me to reframing that to think about what can I build from here can be helpful for moving forward. Rather than thinking, oh, I have lost everything, you can try to reframe things as finding yourself in a pivot point where you're going to be moving forward. So again, not denying that it's a difficult situation and also thinking about what agency you have in the situation and how you can use that to your advantage. Oftentimes, when we find ourselves in difficult situations, we can get caught in anxiety loops. We can get caught in patterns of rumination, and we can lose confidence in how to be able to move forward and what exactly we should do as our wise next steps. It can be really helpful to remind yourself that even when you are feeling anxious, it still is okay. And actually, it's really desirable to engage in activities that are going to move you forward because action actually is a huge powerful antidote to anxiety. There are many treatments for anxiety that actually require people to be engaged with the situations that are causing them anxiety in small doses so that they can build the capacity to be with that discomfort. So when we completely avoid action, it actually increases the stress that we're experiencing. And even though it feels really hard to engage in activities, it can be super helpful to take that first step. And you can make a plan that is going to involve some small steps to build your momentum. And once you take these small steps one after another over time, this consistency in taking action helps you to build confidence. So even though you might be feeling like you want to hide in your house, binge Netflix all day, or play video games, that actually isn't going to be helpful for managing the stress and anxiety that you're feeling. What you actually need to be doing is something productive. So maybe that's reaching out to some friends. Maybe that is exercising. Maybe that is making a brain dump of all the things that are worrying you. So, as you're sitting here, just take a moment to think about what is one action that you could take this week, one small step that will move you forward that might be helpful to alleviate some of the stress and anxiety that you might be feeling right now. So, as you're thinking about steps that you might want to be taking, thinking about crafting your job search strategy can be super helpful. And I know Amanda mentioned there's going to be future webinars that are going to really dig into this in much more depth. But for right now, you can think about some important steps that you might start taking to make you feel like you're empowered and building your momentum. Making sure you're updating your resume and your LinkedIn profile. So, really thinking about some of those broad skills and values and capacities that you have that are bigger than just any one particular job description can be super helpful as you're updating your resume. Thinking about professional contacts that you have and maybe initiating some contacts with those folks might be helpful. Thinking about specific companies that might be worthwhile for you to research and understand a little bit more as you're engaging in your search process. And you'll have some time to kind of craft an interview story. So, what is the story that you want to be telling folks, your sort of elevator pitch, as well as some of the more detailed examples and illustrations of the value you can bring to an employer. Excuse me. And as you're thinking about crafting your job search strategy, you want to be thinking strategically about where and how you're going to be applying to positions rather than really randomly and scattershot applying for positions. So I have been working in higher education for over 30 years. And during that time, I have been on many job searches and read many resumes and CVs and cover letters. And every time that we are looking to fill a position, the most important thing that we're looking for in the application materials is why is this person interested in this position and what value can they bring to this particular position? So, as you're writing your cover letters, you might really think about customizing them to the specific job rather than using the same generic application materials that you're using for every job that you are applying for. So, being strategic allows you to make sure that you're crafting those application materials that are really going to speak to the position to demonstrate that maybe you've done a little research, that you understand about something about this company or what this position entails. And if you find yourself in a position where you are thinking about a career pivot, I would really encourage you to directly acknowledge that when you are preparing your application materials, because sometimes people will wonder if there is no clear statement about why this person is applying for this particular job because their background seems to maybe not be the best match. If you directly explain that somewhere in your materials, that can be super, super helpful. So let me just give you an example of that. Last year, the Center for Wellbeing was searching for a new office service coordinator, and one of our applicants was somebody who had background as a forensic scientist. And I looked at this application and I was like, oh, clearly this person doesn't know what an office service coordinator and a center for well-being is going to do. And so I, wasn't really interested in this application. So this applicant then came to a job fair that we had at WPI and engaged me in a conversation and explained that they're actually interested in making a career pivot and sort of provided some context and explanation of the different kinds of skills that she developed in this other professional role. And we ended up hiring her, and she has really been phenomenal. So, again, don't be afraid, like if you're making a pivot, to provide some explanation for that in your materials if it seems relevant. In addition to having a job search plan, the actions and activities that you're going to be engaging in as you're working your way through your search process, it's also really important to make sure that you have a daily routine because your routine is going to be really helpful for restoring your confidence. So we know that the structure that people experience when they go to work is really important. Kind of structures our lives, structures much of our time, structures much of our days. Similarly to when people retire, when you are laid off, you have unexpectedly been stripped of this structure and routine. And so it's really helpful to intentionally think about what's the new routine that you're going to adopt during this time so that you're not just drifting or floating. So it can be helpful, for instance, to designate 2 to 4 hours of focus time per day that you're going to be working on your job search so that you feel like you're doing something and making some momentum. Can be super helpful to focus on the process that you're engaging in rather than the outcome, which you don't have a lot of control over. As you're thinking about your daily routine, just as you do when you go to work, thinking about separating and cordoning off the amount of time that you're going to devote to the job search from other personal time. And so it's perfectly fine to have a little bit more personal time and think intentionally about what are the things that you can really engage in that are going to fill your cup, that are going to give you joy, that are going to allow you to make the most of this time that you have on your hand. Making sure to think about hobbies maybe that you have abandoned or never had time for before. Hobbies can sometimes be interesting pathways for moving forward in careers and opening up different job opportunities for you. Making sure that you're making time for exercise, sleep, social connection, all of those foundations that are so important for our well-being, even more important during this time in your life. And make a point to track actions that you completed. Again, your focus here can be on the process that you're using for searching for the job, feeling like you're taking some steps, and writing those down. So at the end of the day, you have a sense of accomplishment. Again, I mentioned this before, but setting a time boundary for worry, processing your emotions, again, they're not going to go away, especially if we try to repress them. They'll pop up in other ways that are going to be less healthy. So making some time for them, but also not letting that overtake the entire day. And just as when you were going to work, it can be helpful to create an evening shutdown ritual to sort of mark that you're making this transition from focusing on this job search to doing other things to support your well-being and your family. So making that transition can be helpful. So during the pandemic, many people found that they kind of missed that daily commute that they had in the car or on the train, to make a shift from work mode to home mode. So you can adopt some of those similar kinds of strategies. Some people have done things like go out of their house and walk around the block to give them some sense of making that transition. Or maybe you have a strategy of reviewing what you completed that day and then making the list of what you're going to do the next day so that you're set up to begin the next day ready to go. And that can also be super helpful because having that kind of list can quiet your mind so that you don't have to feel like you need to constantly be engaged in the job search. You need time for rest, you need time for restoration, and if you have a plan to focus on that for a certain number of hours, give yourself permission to rest without guilt, to restore yourself later in the evening. Many people feel less confident in themselves after a layoff. So even though, as we said at the beginning of this webinar, a layoff is not a personal decision, it's a corporate decision based on organizational objectives. It often leaves people feeling less confident in themselves, in their ability, and the value that they are bringing to the workplace. If you find yourself in that position, I encourage you to try to avoid comparing yourself to other people. So if you have other friends and family members who have not been laid off, don't compare your situation with theirs. You really want to sort of stay focused on the things that you can control, what is in your sphere of influence. Can be super helpful to celebrate small wins, revising your resume, updating your LinkedIn, completing some applications. Again, those are opportunities for acknowledging that you're doing the things to move forward. And also control your narrative. So, in addition to using your friends and your support network to process your emotions, you might also want to think about what is the story you want to be able to tell in 5 years or 3 years about this time in your life. How have you built your resilience? How have you been able to strengthen yourself? Maybe you're going to be building some new skills during this time when you're laid off. So thinking about that narrative. So the only story you have to tell about yourself is not only about being laid off. And seek constructive feedback from folks maybe who have recently been in job searches, people who are really good at writing resumes, these kinds of things. And acknowledge what is draining your confidence, because again, we don't want to be ignoring, but rather acknowledging. So we have created an outline of a 7-day reset. So if you're finding yourself discouraged after a layoff and not really sure where to begin, you might want to consider following this 7-day plan. The first 2 days, allow yourself some time for emotional resetting and some reflection. Days 3 and 4, you can spend some time reviewing your materials and thinking about how you can best position yourself, thinking about outreach and applications that you can start working on. And then at the end of the week, review and make adjustments as are necessary. And we'll have a handout that we can share with all of you for that. I don't know if we can put it in the chat, or if not, we can get that emailed to you after this webinar.
It's been shared in the Q&A. There's a link in there. So if folks want to navigate to that link, they can find that for themselves.
Okay, thank you. So as we're wrapping up my remarks, just a closing reflection. This is one chapter in your life. It is not the whole story. Even though it might not feel like it at this particular moment, your career has a long arc, and this is one stop along the way of your career. Even though many of us don't like it, we do find that we build resilience in these kind of difficult transitions. And it can also be helpful to remind yourself, what are some other situations, difficult situations that you have been through that you have mastered and you've been successful? Because reminding yourself that you are resilient and you are strong is super helpful at this point. And so I hope that before you leave this webinar today, that you actually write down for yourself one commitment that you are making for yourself this week. Again, action is the antidote to anxiety. And so you really want to think about what are some small steps that you can be taking. I also wanted to share a couple thoughts about some other resources that you might find helpful as you are undergoing your job search. So, several books that I recommend are a new one called Becoming You by Susie Welch, who has a bunch of exercises and strategies for thinking about like what is the job that you want and what do you want from your career. So if you find yourself in this point where you're making this transition, searching for jobs, maybe you're thinking about your values and what you really want and how this job, how a future job can really move you towards the goals that you're interested in. So this book can be super helpful. The Portfolio Life by Christina Wallace really is another great read, that very practical, thinking about how a well-designed life has multiple components of it that are helpful for building a resilient life. And so it could be helpful for you to think about how you can lean into some of these other aspects of your life right now as you're, making, searching for a new position. If you're struggling with your routines and you're keeping your momentum going, Atomic Habits by James Clear has lots of really useful strategies and tips for building good habits and helping to reduce undesirable ones. And if you are looking for some inspiration, Rising Strong or Daring Greatly by Brene Brown are great reads about the value and the power of embracing our vulnerability, especially when we're in these times of transition. And so thinking about getting some new skills and mental frameworks for that. I also highly recommend the podcast NPR Life Kit if you're not already familiar with it. It actually has a recent episode about layoffs that talk about some financial pieces of things that you can do to support your well-being, which we did not get into in this webinar today, as well as some other useful tips and strategies. And NPR Life Kit has lots of great information on general adulting strategies that might be helpful if you have some time to dig into some of those episodes. And as I mentioned, there is this handout, the 7-day career reset plan, if you want some other ideas and thoughts for reflection and building your plan to move forward over the next week. Well, it really has been wonderful being able to share some information with you all. Hopefully, something of what you heard is valuable as you're continuing in your job search and negotiating this challenging time in your life. And we do have some time for Q&A, so we can open it up either for questions for me or Amanda.
Happy to field any questions that you have. If you are looking for that 7-day reset or any of the additional upcoming information on webinars, those are all in that link in the Q&A under answered. That link will take you to our alumni page and will gain you access to the 7-day reset, upcoming webinars, and other information that might be helpful to you. And I will also be adding the recording of this webinar from today to that.